Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your attendance today in this very, very important training that is being hosted through the Employee Assistance Program. As many of you know, I am Petrolia Walker, and today I'm going to serve as your moderator for this workshop. I, however, will not be presenting it because we have with us today Dr. Anthony, he goes by Tony, Anthony Bavakwa, and he will be our presenter and facilitator of the training today. I'm excited because he is an executive coach with the Spring Hill Company, a foundation created and founded by LeBron James. It is an entertainment and executive coaching organization. He does a lot of professional development, but he is also an associate professor at the Los Angeles Trade Technical College and in psychology. And so we are excited to have him with us today. So I wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things before we turn the mic over to Tony. One of the things I'd like to share with you is about the Project Wellbeing. I had an email from someone saying, well, what is that? Well, this is the launch of it. And this is about piggybacking off of what the city of LA has set forth as an initiative. The Project Wellbeing at LACCD is piggybacking off of what's happening in Santa Monica and Los Angeles, throughout the California region, actually, and even across some of the states. Mental health, as you know, has become a real major issue. And as you saw from the informational email I sent out, we're seeing that it is a global problem. But in America alone, there is a mental health crisis. So on today, I'd like for all of you to please keep your mics muted unless, we request that you open your mic. But feel free to put in the chat your questions. We are going to be taking questions periodically, but we want to make sure that you're able to see the screens and all of the participants are able to hear the presentation. This is very interesting information that has been around for more than 20 years, but the state of California's first Surgeon General championed the project called ACES Aware. That project, now that she is no longer the general surgeon, that project has now been picked up by UCLA and UC San Francisco. They had a major presentation recently on September 27 of this past month regarding making state of California more ACEs aware and providing healthcare services to Medi-Cal patients around that same premise of treating them with trauma-informed information. The crisis, of course, on the mental health side of our lives has to do with ACEs, toxic stress, and actually being aware of where do you fall in those numbers. And so today we're going to hear some real good information about it. Please remember, this is a public platform. And because of that, we want to make sure that we keep your private health as well as financial information just that, private. So please do not share your private health and financial information if you are talking on the mic at any time, and definitely in the chat. Please be mindful if you have questions, what information you are sharing in this public forum. So I think, Tony, that I have talked enough. We're going to jump into achieving mental fitness, overcoming ACEs and toxic stress. But before I give you the mic, I'd like for all of you all to go to your reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And would you give me a thumbs up if you have ever heard about ACEs? If you've heard about ACEs or know anything about ACEs, ACES, Adverse Childhood Experiences, before the video went out yesterday. Please, let's see how many of you have heard of this phenomenon called ACEs, or the study itself. So, all right, perfect. So a few of you have heard, but not enough of us, right? So being aware of ACEs and what effects it has on us cognitively, on our working memory, especially for our college students, our coworkers, our family members, how ACEs gets under the skin. We're going to address that today as well. And that it is not just one demographic of people. It affects all of us. And so this is going to be very informative. And I am now turning this mic over to you, Tony. Take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Bevacqua, and I've been in this sort of world of executive coaching and education for 15 years now. And I like, first of all, what Petralia is doing with the idea of calling it Project Wellbeing and achieving mental fitness, because I think one of the things in our culture is that we sort of separate mental and the physical. It goes all the way back to Rene Descartes in the 17th century and that idea of dualism. But much of the way our brain works and the networks within our brain have the same connections to things like heart disease and depression. So we want to think in terms of overall improving upon a whole body experience and understanding on how it all plays together. It's very porous between the mental and the physical. And so we're going to talk about when I was first introduced to adverse childhood experiences and give you a little bit more of a background on that in terms of my experience. So the course objectives. So what is ACEs? Adverse childhood experiences. When I was researching my book that I wrote in 2015 on addiction, I was trying to figure out what was going on with so many people that were being labeled as being an addict or drug addict, and all this real labeling type of language that was deficit-based and emotionally charged. And I wanted to see if there was any commonality with them. One of the things I found out is that in cases of people who had serious drinking problems or drug problems, that over 60% had some form of adverse child experience. They had some form of trauma. Now, why that was important for me is because it made me rethink, because that was what the name of the book was, rethinking addiction in a different way, is that we have to now humanize people who are having emotional and behavioral difficulties. If we just go to the label of disease, disorder, it implies lifetime therapy or medication, when as a child, it's not our fault that we had these types of experiences. And this goes for everyone. So we know that everyone has experienced a little bit of something. If it's not a direct adverse experience, it's something that occurred in childhood that stays with us because our brain is pretty much being shaped and formed when we're children. And a lot of our emotional development the foundation is laid around 3 years old, and our personality development starts to be shaped and formed by 6 and 7 years old. And so when we talk about these childhood experiences, we're talking about things like abuse and trauma and neglect, which we'll get into a slide that'll list them out for you. What this creates is what's called toxic stress. Now, stress is not a bad thing. There's a thing called good stress. So let's say, for any of us, but we'll just go back to childhood. Child studying for an exam, or they're doing something like preparing for a sporting event or something that they're participating in. They're stressed out. That's good. That's common. That's normal. There's a tolerable stress, where maybe a child experiences his grandma or a family member or somebody passed away. So then it's up to the adults to sort of help them through that emotional experience. But when we get to toxic stress, we're talking about a more chronic, prolonged stress. And it's something that actually, physiologically changes the brain. And in doing so, it sort of freezes that person into these negative ways of thinking, this fear-based way of responding to the world around them. Because remember, as children, our moms and our dads, our families are there to make us feel safe and secure. We don't really know what's going on in the world. We have to be enculturated to learn about what's right, what's wrong, what's good. We adopt a language. So ACEs contributes directly to toxic stress. And the more toxic stress you have, it is correlated directly with anxiety, depression, and problematic relationships. And of course, addictive type of behaviors. Remember, people who are drinking or have drug problems, whatever, they are dealing with anxiety and depression as a way to cope with those experiences. And so they had to originate somewhere. We weren't born anxiety-ridden and depressed. We weren't born that way. And so then I want to give you some pretty basic, but oftentimes things that we take for granted, but we don't do, that can be strategies toward helping to deal with these emotional difficulties in ourselves and with others. So somebody sent me this recently, and this was on CNN, and they did a poll. This is just recent poll. 90% of US adults believe that we're experiencing a mental health crisis. The Dr. Gupta, who is on the segment, he was asked, did he think that was too high? And he thought it would be 100%. And as you look at the things here, opioid epidemic, mental health of kids and teens, severe mental illness in adults, anxiety or depression in adults, stress or anxiety from politics, and loneliness. Now, most people do not like to be vulnerable. And when I work in the corporate world, and I ask people, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? 9, 10. But then their behavior doesn't mirror that. They're obviously having challenges, but they basically internalize it. And so they have that internal struggle, that internal suffering. And so this is now in the news. It's becoming more and more prevalent as far as people being aware of it, but we're still not getting a handle of it because of the way I feel that we talk about it or what we're not talking about. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video and give you a little idea of what a particular child may have experienced growing up that would affect them in an adverse way.
When I was a kid, I used to think, if I could just grow up, if I could just get through, I could leave all this behind. But that's not how it works. Everything that happened, it's still part of me. But there's hope. I learned how to heal from toxic stress and make sure the cycle ends with me.
Learn more about toxic stress and how you can stop it at stresshealth.org.
So those are the kind of experiences that when a child grows up, unless they've learned to process that, remember as a child, it's not our fault, but that's where we learn based on our upbringing to internalize shame, guilt, confusion. So the original ACES test was in the 1990s. They surveyed over 17,000 people. 70% were Caucasian and college educated. And they asked them just 10 questions. And you just answer yes or no on them. Any form of psychological abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, loss of a parent, mother treated violently. We know since the pandemic, the rates of domestic violence have increased, substance abuse, mental health issues, and criminal behavior in the household. And over 60% had more than one, or at least one, and 12% had 4 or more of the 10. Post-pandemic realities, we see that things that can continue to produce toxic stress are things like homelessness, which has increased, financial insecurity, which has increased, food insecurity, political insecurity. You see, if you're somebody who's vulnerable to begin with, or I should say even emotionally unstable and holding it in, and then you turn on your television set, that is going to be a trigger for even further distress, the way the media portrays what's going on in the world. And of course, the racial and cultural sensitivity issues that again are part of what we see in the media. So all of these are things contributing to how we live our lives every single day. We wake up with this mindset of going into the world with a way of thinking and feeling and acting. Years later, 2013, 2019, and they've done many follow-ups of this, but they took 14,000 people just in the state of California between the years of 2013 and 2019, called the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences. So now as adults, they're looking back and answering the same ACEs questions. 33.6% had 0. 48.9% had 1 to 3, and 17.5% had 4 or more, which literally means in this meeting right now, at least 1 out of 2 have 1 to 3 of these, have had one of these experiences themselves. It's that prevalent. And why it's important to be familiar with, and why I think it's an important education, is not to say we have to go back and blame our parents. It's not to say we need to go to a therapist for the rest of our life and talk about our childhood as depicted in, television shows or movies where you go to your therapist, on a regular basis and talk about when you were a little kid, but more to give you the idea that this is experiences that you've had that is contributing to anxiety and depression and to the behaviors that are preventing you from being more fulfilled and satisfied in your life. It's not your fault as a child, but as an adult, there are things, if you're aware of this, that you can do so you don't see yourself as having a lifelong problem that you can never get yourself out of. Why does this matter? Well, you can read this, but we know that it leads to just about, or contributes toward just about everything. anxiety, depression. People increase their likelihood of smoking cigarettes, obesity, panic disorders, promiscuity, teenage pregnancies, alcoholism, drug use. And again, if you think about it logically, is it because these people who do all this are addicted, have a disorder, are diseased, are hopeless, are helpless? Or does it make sense that when they were young and their brain was shaping and forming, and they relied on their parents to make them safe and secure, had experiences that hardwired their brain into negativity and fear? And these are ways for them to cope with everyday living. Well, if you think about it like that, then there's a lot more empathy and compassion when we deal with people who are difficult, whether they're students, colleagues, significant relationships, children, our children, family, friends. Their behaviors that we can observe are signals that something is going with them, something happened to them that they haven't resolved yet. And the same thing we can do to ourselves. How do these ACEs affect the mental fitness and well-being of the individual? Well, first of all, and again, we don't have time to describe how the brain develops, but we can say that things begin with little brains wired to the world around them as a baby. And everything starts with experience. Experience creates learning and memory, and that forms the neural connections, the connections between neurons. We form trillions and trillions of connections, but it's all based on experience. So what an adverse experience can do in creating toxic stress is it hardwires the brain to negativity and fear. And so what we do by mistake culturally is we see somebody and think of, well, what's wrong with them? Or why aren't we able to control them? Or why are they acting in such a way? And so then we label them and we make the way they are, because we have to give it a name, which can be stigmatizing, which is usually deficit-based and emotionally charged, sick, drug addict, depressed, bipolar. We actually speak in that language, even when people don't have an actual problem with it. But if they're moody, you're bipolar. And so this gets reinforcing, because anything that we repeatedly do all the time becomes part of us. And so we basically submit unconsciously to negativity and fear. And our brain is a predictive organ based on past experiences. So just to really try to simplify that, what I try to explain to students as simplistically as I can is like, if you receive on your smartphone a text message, let's say, that said, "We have to talk," or "Call me immediately," something like that, right? You'll feel your body immediately reacting to that. But what is it reacting to? It's reacting to past experience. Maybe the last time you had a message like that, whether it was on a text message or speaking to somebody, an email, or speaking to somebody in person, maybe the person, if it was a significant other, they were breaking up with you. Your parents were, upset with you about something. Your employer was, letting you go or laying you off. So if your past experiences were all anxiety ridden and depressed or stressed, or if you had problem relationships or whatever that you haven't really resolved, then you're always on the repeat automatic button. And anything that you are assessing in your world on a day-to-day basis, moment to moment, your brain's predicting the response to it. Why is that important to sort of conceptualize? Because we think that anxiety and depression happens to us. It's just happening to us. But because of our past experiences, it's actually something that we've made and created and constructed. And so we can work on that part of our mental fitness and our well-being by understanding that it's not a fixed thing that we have to deal with forever. And what's also important is that we need to be able to what's referred to as body budgeting. So body budgeting is a scientific term for this is called allostasis. And again, if you ever thought of like when you get triggered, let's say, when you've been triggered before, and everyone's familiar with that term, let's say you react emotionally and you get in an argument, you raise your voice. What does the other person generally do as well? They raise their voice. So that means that both of you are expending a lot of energy on a metabolic level. Your blood pressure goes up, your breathing gets, shallow, your body, you have cortisol, a stress hormone that's cruising through your body. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated. Your hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis is activated. You got all these things. Your amygdala, the emotional area of your brain, that's activated. Everything's activated. So now your body is out of budget, like you're withdrawing, if it was money, taking away from your body. If you were to lower your voice, if you were to be able to consciously be aware that, well, this is a better way of handling this dispute, then what would happen is that you are in control of yourself and you help control the other person. So it's just for an example purpose. But then you are managing each other's body budget. If you are toxically stressed, you are having a lot of trouble managing your body. And as I said, there's your mental and your physical is not separated. It is very porous. The mind is a function of the brain. So the mental and the physical are working together. And this forms what's called our subjectivity. Subjectivity is the really hardwired to be submissive and to have a negative way of looking at ourselves, our future, our environment, and people around us. It's very fear-based, but this is the views that we have, the judgments that we make, and the feelings that we have, and the beliefs that we have, but based on past experience.
So Tony, just to interject a question that I have, are you saying basically toxic stress or stress of any kind, anxiety, whatever, is not really what's happening to us from the outside, but what's really going on as we deal with what's happening on the inside, right? Is how we're dealing with whatever is happening, but from the inside, we're creating or allowing stress to manifest in us. Is that
yes
said well?
Yes. We think that anxiety, depression, and addiction, these are things that have their own life. This is why I was saying, like, going back to Descartes, we still have this idea in our culture that there's the mind and then there's a body. There's addiction, there's anxiety, there's depression, and they're like these separate things that occur. They come upon us. We're stuck with them now, and we have to deal with them for the rest of our lives. But they come from the same brain areas that are affecting our heart and our diabetes and all the other physical ailments that we may have, because we have created them through language, enculturation, and through how we identify what those are through our experiences. So we're creating, in a sense, the anxiety that we're trying to prevent ourselves from having to experience. So we're the ones that can actually change that. But yeah, we're making sense. That's all our brain is doing. It's trying to make sense. It doesn't know anxiety. It doesn't know depression. Those are just vocabulary words that we use as a culture to identify these sort of things happening in terms of our lives. But we create it. We construct it.
Okay. Thank you for that.
So how's this subjectivity develop? Well, we start developing neurons in the prenatal stage, in the embryonic stage of prenatal, and all the way up through adolescence. So this is the building block years of brain development. Brain development. When your brain develops, you're developing your emotional life, you're developing your personality. So the brain is very malleable. You know, your brain's not fully developed until around 25 years old. So in the same way as a child, if you were to teach them, multiple languages, teach them the sciences and all these really, challenging different disciplines, their brains are like a sponge when they're very young. And then, of course, it's much harder as you get older to learn new things, right? Well, then their brain is a real sponge if they're having adverse experiences. And that's what their brain is growing and shaping around. And as I mentioned before, the emotional foundation doesn't mean it can't change, but the building blocks for your emotional life at 50, at 30, at 20 happens at 3. And the building blocks, the personality, the foundation for who you are at 50, at 30, that personality is around 6 to 7 years old. So early on in life sets the tone for much of what will come after. And we now know that these experiences harm all these things that we would separate in the past and call them physical things, like the nervous system, the endocrine system, that control the glands that produce the hormones, immune system. You probably know from your own experience, you get stressed out, you're more likely to get sick. Your immune system goes down. Also, this exposure causes what's called epigenetic influences, and I refer to it as generational, because if you're stressed as a child and you grow up, in that video, they showed a night that the child grew up and now he's with a happy, wife and baby. But if he continued on like his father had continued on, he'd be passing on to the next generation. There would be that predisposition in their genes. But remember, your genes are not your destiny. Genes are there to obviously instruct your cells what to do. But it's the nurturing that occurs that is going to take you where you're going to eventually end up. And so this is happening generationally because things like diabetes, for example, passed on a generation. When we talk about alcoholism, it's being passed on. But where we've made the mistake is just to say, well, it runs in the family, there's nothing we can do about it. But what also runs in the family is this inability to cope with things like stress, anxiety, and depression, and ways systematically as a community and as a culture to help people who are homeless and have food insecurity or financial insecurity, and to prioritize helping people and looking at them as human beings having human experiences rather than just labeling them and sort of discarding them and then making them feel shame and guilt and internalize their suffering. And all of this then continues to reinforce toxic stress. And when you're putting all this constant stress on your stress response system, you're always, it's like keeping your foot on the gas on park. You're not going to go anywhere. You're just burning energy, burning all these cells going off in your body, and you're damaging organ systems. Again, effects on adolescents and young adults. So unstable work histories, difficulty forming healthy and stable relationships, susceptible to disease, illness, and mental health challenges over a lifetime, health risk behaviors, alcohol and drugs, criminal activity. I mean, again, things that we look at like, well, that's other people or that's something separate, but it's all related. It's all related because much of these behaviors, for example, why would somebody be affected in terms of getting sick from an adverse child behavior? Because maybe one of their coping skills with their stress and anxiety and depression is to eat a lot of bad food. And so they're unhealthy and they don't exercise. And either they don't eat nutritious food or perhaps they don't have access to nutritious food. So some things we have control over, some things we may not have control over, which is why we need the community and a systematic plan to help those who cannot help themselves. But we all can be helped. So I get just a little toxic stress explains how ACEs gets under the skin. Under the skin means that it's pervasive. It's always there. Have you ever just woke up day after day and just not feeling right? Something's always going on. Wake up, oh, my stomach hurts. That you're in a bad mood, and you just can. The whole day seems to be like ruined because first thing in the morning you got in an argument. The whole rest of the day is ruined. Now this is just normal for people that have regular life experiences, navigating through life. And having stressors make them have to respond to what's going on. But when you have toxic stress, you don't have a way of saying, oh, this, is something that I can handle. This is something I know how to deal with. You're, again, just on automatic pilot, reacting. Biology just firing off, and you're expending so many resources on that metabolic level. And so you're stuck. It's like you're in quicksand. So with somebody saying to you like, well, you can change or read a self-help book, it's really challenging because your brain is wired. It's programmed that way. It's like telling somebody on your computer, I want you to do some graphic arts for me, but you don't have that software on your program and your computer. You can't do it. You can't do it. So again, knowing this, empathy, compassion. We get upset with people that may disagree with us, who are non-compliant, who disagree, that are like trouble to talk with. But there's something going on. There's something that has happened to them. And there's something that happened to us, because the next time that we allow somebody to trigger us, then we can always ask ourselves the question, why are we responding in that way? Why does that matter to us that that person did or said something? And that's a way that we can be really self-aware of ourselves, because we need to be in the world and have relationships with people in everything that we do. It's not us against them. It's always a we relationship with the world. Again, changes to the brain. So the toxic stress, if we get directly related to like schooling and education, it interferes with attention. It interferes with our ability to control our impulses, with decision-making, with learning, with emotion, and just response to everyday stressors, which are normal, but it just amplifies it all. I talk to students all the time. I ask them such questions as, how much sleep do you get? They say like 4 or 5 hours. I teach high school kids. They sleep 4 or 5 hours. They get up at 5 in the morning to go to school. That's a systemic problem. Then you get a student who's tired, who's not paying attention. As an instructor, you might get upset, right? You're not paying attention. You take it personally. Well, he hasn't had any sleep. I mean, that's not all the time the case, but something like that is explainable. And if you don't get enough sleep, it affects your memory. So how motivated are you going to be in the school day if perhaps you haven't slept, you haven't eaten? So these are things, and this affects your brain. And then, of course, like part of the brain is this, our cognitive ability to do everything, basically. And so when you're growing up under these situations from the time you're little and the first time you're introduced into the education of going to school and everything, you're a little off, you're a little behind. We know with children who haven't learned to read, how difficult it is in every area of their life, just not even learning how to read. Now, pile on that stress, anxiety, depression caused from, growing up, and they have a big challenge in front of them.
There's a question here from Doris about the sleep portion of this. So are you finding sleep issues correlating with the ACEs? The whole issue around not getting enough sleep, does that correlate with ACEs, meaning that they're not able to sleep because of the ACEs, or is it just increasing the toxic stress in their lives with the underlying ACEs effect?
That's a great question. So it's a combination. So with ACEs, and you are going into the world with the stress, anxiety, and depression, it affects your ability to sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you affect your brain's ability, because we have a brain area called the hippocampus, which is responsible for consolidating memory. And it also works with what's referred to as the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland, in suppressing the stress response. So if you don't get enough sleep, your hippocampus isn't working properly. So you're affecting your ability to learn, you're affecting your ability to manage stress, and you're actually producing more of the stress hormone, more cortisol, before you even started your day the next day. And of course, now you're stressed. Now you're not remembering what's on the test. And then, of course, you don't do well. That reinforces the depression or the anxiety. And then the whole thing just turns into a vicious circle. Is that a little bit more clear?
If I can speak, because I asked the question. Thank you so much for Petrella for having this, and Anthony for really doing this wonderful presentation. Yes, I've been thinking about the area of sleep and wanted to ask you, Anthony, as a follow-up. Do you suspect, as a researcher in the ACEs area, that sleep problems actually come early with the early experiences? In other words, when the traumatic experiences occur in childhood, do you think that are we discussing scientifically, does the sleep problems actually begin to, let's say, set in at that point? Do we have any knowledge about that?
Well, sleep is an area that most people have been ignoring for years, and it's just becoming more and more understood that it has a major impact on everything, physical and mental. And when a child is traumatized, they have difficulty immediately with sleep. And when you have a difficulty with sleep, you have difficulty again with processing emotion, with managing stress, with learning. And then you start your day, again, picture the child who has that sort of early childhood experience, has difficulty sleeping, tossing and turning, maybe even having night terrors or bad dreams or whatever. They start their day going to school. They're afraid. So now they're really feeling uncomfortable in their own bodies. They're experiencing anxiety. They're very sensitive to any kind of a trigger or whatever. They're tired. They're not able to pay attention. They're not able to really learn. Then they're criticized by, let's say, a teacher or some adult or whatever. And then, they're marginalized maybe by other people in their school or their friends or whatever that maybe don't have those experiences. Then they go home at night, they can't focus on homework, they go back to sleep, don't get enough sleep again, and continue on and on. Now, if we're saying Did they have problems sleeping in the beginning before any of that occurred? There hasn't been research linking it in that order. It's the adverse condition occurs, and then we're seeing all the things that it's causing coming from it, or I should say correlated with it. Because remember, there's always a lot of different contributing factors. There's always people who have like matured out of it through support, so not everyone, has like problem, with it. But again, it depends what it was, the severity of it, how many of those are. But that's really the problem with sleep. And again, if I just go back to my own students, and this is what I talk about when we talk about hardwiring and how your brain just gets shaped and formed in its place. I literally will tell students, okay, so you only got 4 or 5 hours of sleep, you're stressed out and you're anxious. So let me give you like a little exercise. Between now and the next class, try to sleep for 7 hours, right? Because 7 to 9 hours is the ideal period of time. Next week goes by, I ask them, so anybody sleep more than 4? Nobody. So think about it. I'm saying if you sleep just a couple more hours on a regular basis, you will reduce your stress that you're so consumed with. But see, either they can't do it because of what's going on in their environment, or they don't have the brain capacity, meaning they are hardwired to submission to the negativity and the fear in their life from whatever is going on in their life, reinforced by their day-to-day living and circumstances which haven't changed, to not feel like it is a priority. And we have to, as educators and as politicians and people in that more trying to address the systematic problem, to try to reach them on that level. There should be programs on stress reduction. There should be later school, starting times for a lot of students. Like we know from what's called the circadian rhythm, our 24-hour biological clock, that kids' brains, they don't kick in to go to sleep until later at night anyway. You can't make a kid go to bed early and then get him up early and figure he's getting enough sleep. They're naturally not ready for sleep until later, but then they're getting up early. That throws them completely off as well. So there are some functional systemic fixes that we could do, but it has to be something that, is thought about in that way. Does that sort of address that?
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. What can we do? What can you and I do? One thing to do is think like this, even with yourself, but like usually it's with other people. Because again, I get back to that triggers thing. Everybody gets triggered. Well, you're getting triggered because that means something that it's signaled in you. Well, what is it? Where'd that come from? Where did that come from, right? But the next time somebody is acting in a way that, you find distasteful or not understanding or whatever, don't have the tendency of saying, what is wrong with that person? What's wrong with you? Why are you acting that way? Think in terms of what happened to them. What happened to me? What happened to you? When you get triggered, okay, wait a minute, this is a signal. What happened to me that made me say this particular type of response? And again, it may not have to be an adverse childhood experience, but something made you react or overreact or overthink. What was it? What was it? So again, don't pathologize it. Just human being having a human experience. And we don't know what your experiences were. Only you do. Only they do, whoever it is that we're engaged with. We can become more self-aware. So part of that self-awareness is to realize, what is it that we're saying to people? Do we show people more respect? And are we really listening to them? Or are we just trying to insert our authority or our opinions? We don't like people that disagree with us. We don't like people that don't comply with us. And see, these are part of things that trigger us. So identify your triggers and be aware of what are these things that are going on with you that make you respond in certain ways. And then where do those come from? If you can identify them, you can sort of preempt them. I know that every time I speak to, a relative, they get me upset because they're going to ask me the same question about something. Because I now am self-aware that that's what's going to happen, I'm going to be able to anticipate it. By anticipating it, I'm going to maybe feel that initial biological reaction, but I'm going to be able to control myself. And so now I'm in control. I'm in a lot more control. And so like with coworkers or with students or people that we're working with, don't be quick to just basically think and react. What you want to do is you want to stop and think to stop. And then what's going on with me if this is really bothering me? And what happened to them that may be going on with them that I'm not aware of? I give you a really quick example of that. There was a person at this corporation I was working at who people used to say good morning to her every morning. She said good morning every morning. One morning, she didn't say good morning. 2 or 3 people behind her breath basically said, like, what's the matter with her? She's stuck up. She's like, rude. This is their vocabulary in response to somebody who didn't say hi back to them. So in other words, they took it personally. Come to find out, she had just come from the hospital where her son was in the hospital because he was really sick. When they found that out, of course, they felt bad. But why do you have to find out after the fact? Why do you have to assume that that person, because they didn't say hi to you, you took it personally? So that taking it personally is a trigger. Why? Where did that come from? What happened to you that would bother you? Self-compassion. Well, you know how if somebody asks you for help, you're going to be with them, throughout the whole thing, right? You're going to always want to tell them what to do. You're going to be there as a friend. You're going to be there as a mentor. We have to do that for ourselves. If we're filled with shame and guilt, we never allow ourselves any grace, any forgiveness, anything. We don't give ourselves a break. Most people who are experiencing really severe forms of depression and addictive behaviors and anxiety, they beat themselves up. You've heard that expression. You can take that expression, beat themselves up, and put that with the getting under your skin. So we got to, again, slow down, think, stop to think to stop. You know what? If this happened to me when I was 5, it's not my fault. Now I'm an adult. I'm older. I can do something. I can do something for myself. I can do something to not repeat this with my children. And if I'm dealing with other people, I can help them and allow them to be open about what might have happened to them and to be able to address it and maybe do something about it. And of course, empathy. We miss a lot of empathy in our culture because, again, just turn on the news. It always looks like we have warring sides. And I don't care what people's ethnicity, religious affiliations, and politics are. At the end of the day, what we all have in common is we are part of the human condition. And that is the commonality that we don't spend a lot of time focusing on. That could be an education into itself. Where is the humanity? Where is the empathy for other people? And in this part of mental, what we refer to anyway as mental health, although, as I said, I love well-being and mental fitness, we put people in little boxes. So let's put ourselves in other people's shoes. And if we say what happened to them, well, wouldn't that affect you the same way if that happened to you? Don't you think that might mess with you if that happened to you? Oh, and you were like 5 at the time? If we start thinking that way, we see others as human beings. We want to be non-judgmental. So that means we don't want to label people. It's like Carl Rogers was a humanistic psychologist back in the 60s, and he had a term called unconditioned positive regard. You could tell me anything. I had a student once that was an older guy in his 60s, and he literally told me that he had been away for 30-something years. And he said, I said, 36 years? You're going that long? Because he said I was away. And I asked him, you're away where? He said, he was in prison. I said, in prison? I said, and as I thought, it's just like, well, what did you do? Did you kill somebody? He goes, yes. And without missing a beat, I said, all right, well, it was a long time ago. And, now you're in school trying to make yourself better. And I will help you to get acclimated into the school system and the educational system again and move forward. There's no judgments there. I mean, I don't know his life and his experiences, but he's back in school. He paid his debt to society, and now he wants to get better. Well, we can't do that if we already judge people and already put them in a box. We can consider our tone of voice and our nonverbal cues when we're talking to people. Like, again, I was mentioning about the body budgeting. If somebody's yelling at you, your self-awareness should say, okay, let me make sure that I don't get triggered. I understand why I might find this a problem for me, why I'm getting triggered. It's a signal, but I'm going to now have the tool and the conscious awareness to lower my voice, to not go, have a conversation that might be serious with somebody who's agitated. You have to be thinking. I want a raise. You go into the boss, he's talking on the phone and he's yelling at somebody. Well, we know that's not the time to ask for more money. You have a serious conversation you want to have with a coworker or a student or your child. Well, not when they're emotionally distraught to begin with. We control what we can. A lot of people's, day-to-day uncertainty and fear that has really been accentuated from the pandemic is that we want control. Most people are wanting control. When we don't have control, it creates anxiety, depression, stress. And so we need to control what we have control over, and then sort of think about, well, if we don't really have control over these things, we sort of have to just let it go. Because if you think about it, we overthink things that we don't have any control over. Let's just do really well every day what we have control over. So you got 5 things that you put for your goal for the day, check them off. 5 things you might not have any control over that you'd like to do, okay. But I can't let my emotional and physical health be dictated by what is outside my control. And most do on some level. And we always want to meet people where they are, including ourselves. I feel people can change, but the change they have to help, be a part of. So we can't let a person who has some sort of stress, anxiety, depression, has some sort of addictive behavior, and label them and tell them that we're the authority and we know all the answers and that we're experts and this is what you need to do and this is a problem that you're going to be dealing with forever. We need to figure out, okay, what is something that you value? What are your strengths? What is it that where you can experience some form of joy? What things provide you with satisfaction and fulfillment? When have you ever felt a peace of mind? And when we can really relate to people on that human level, then we can move them forward. And that means to make some redescriptions. In my book, I talk about rethinking excessive habits and addictive behaviors. So in our culture, we're good at labelizing and medicalizing and pathologizing emotional and behavioral difficulties. They reinforce shame, guilt, and stigma and fear, which for many people began in childhood with adverse childhood experiences. So their brains become fixed in like a dependent mindset. How do you know? Because every day they're stressed, anxious, and depressed. How do you know? Because they go to therapy for 30 years. How do you know? Because they're going to group meetings for the rest of their lives because of their addictive problems. So they have given up, basically. We have to create more resiliency. That the traumatized brain, which is fixated, we want to make it have more of a growth mindset, make people more independent minded, more wanting to evolve and change. To do that, there needs to be new ways of looking at it, new ways of talking about it, new learning, new experiences, new ways of having relationships with people that are not, I'm here, I'm the expert, and you're down here, but we're all together working on this collaboratively. When we're able to do that and somebody can actually change the way they think and believe and feel through this kind of a support and different things that they can do, which I'm going to get to in the next slide, their brain rewires itself. It sort of not undoes toxic stress, but it helps the brain have more options for prediction. And this is called neuroplasticity, where the brain has this ability to rewire it itself, which is exciting. It's hopeful. So what are some of the things that you can do? What, again, and as I'm talking about this, but I'm also talking about us, because we're part of our childhood. We're the product now of our childhood. Students are the product of their childhood. Colleagues and friends are the products of their childhood. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not about blaming mom and dad. The past is the past. It's not about going to Freud people and sitting on a couch for the next 30 years. It's not about taking antidepressant drugs and anti-anxiety drugs for 30 years. Again, these problems lie along a continuum, and there are really severe cases. We're not going to that extreme. We're talking about really the bulk of people on a day-to-day basis who experience these sort of day-to-day problems that they have been led to believe are something way outside of their control and that they need that type of intervention. I'm saying that we can sort of understand through ACES how this was something that we actually learned and programmed by those experiences. So things that we can do to help ourselves are, of course, the redescriptions. So start using things like well-being and mental fitness. Start not judging people or have to label them that what's wrong with them, and start thinking in terms of what's happened to them. Start thinking in terms of that the feeling that you're getting is a signal, or that they're being signaled that there's something happening to them. We talk about nutrition. Again, some people have no access to food insecurity, financial insecurity, homelessness. But we can do better at making sure that we personally, if we can, eat nutritional meals. We consume way too much sugar. One study showed that we are 8 times more addicted to sugar than somebody who is on cocaine. Sugar is more addictive than cocaine. And we don't have time today to get into all the problems that sugar causes in terms of wreaking havoc on our bodies. But if sugar throws our glucose, our blood sugar off, that leads to diabetes. That's a big problem in this country. We can try to learn to eat better, make better nutritional choices, but then to encourage it with others. See, we need to be role models as well. Exercise is important. It should be mandatory. I understand many schools, they don't have gym anymore. Gym used to be like an opportunity to run around. Now kids are inside all the time. They're on their smartphones, they're on their computers. They don't have any time to do anything. They don't even go outside anymore. So obesity is a problem with young kids now as well. Sleep, huge. Get enough sleep. The time frame between 7 and 9 hours is the key area. That's what the research shows. And without that, we're affecting our emotional health, our ability to manage stress, our memories, learning. So we need to get some sleep, and then we can model that behavior and encourage it and educate it to everyone else. We need supportive relationships, because if everybody around us is stressed and anxious, what are we going to learn? We're going to think, oh, okay, well, this is okay. I'm stressed, they're stressed, she's anxious, I'm anxious, she's depressed, I'm depressed. So that's just the way it is. Well, no. So we need people that can support us so that we can pass it on, form groups. Mindfulness is just to be, again, in the moment and be aware and to think in the moment and stop and think before you react to things and be grateful and appreciative of the things that we do have that are in our control without just being so consumed within our own heads.
We're at the end here. I did want to first thank you, because this has been extremely enlightening. Just the various discussions that you have given to us around this topic has been quite eye-opening. Achieving mental fitness is going to require help, I can guarantee you. And I'm glad that we do have our LifeWorks EAP program in place since January of 2022. I know that you looked online at the district's website, and it's still underway of being re-architectured. So I have not been able to get the updated information onto the webpage for the EAP program, but it's here before you. Also, before most of you leave, I'd like to share a link in the chat of where you could go and take a free ACES test and know what number you're at. I took mine this morning and I was very pleased with my results, but there's also a resiliency test, and I was just as impressed with that as well. There are additional resources here. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a new number for it now. You can just dial 988, and it is active across the United States, as well as the crisis text line to NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness. You can text 741-741 for 24/7 crisis support. There's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. We will be looking next week at information that I'll be sending out for EAP around domestic violence prevention and awareness. And so that will be some emails that you'll receive from me at this time. And then the National Sexual Assault Hotline is available as well. And these are just a few of the resources. But we do have about 6 minutes left for questions. If anyone wants to open their mic, feel free to do that. If you have some questions, I see a lot of people were very pleased with this information, Tony, and I say it is a great resource. And so if you really have benefited from today's workshop and you have no questions, give a thumbs up to Tony now, because he has done an excellent job in this presentation.